Hello and welcome to the Kuyamanga Institute, our Q&A conversation for exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, and of course on behalf of our Board of Directors, advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Kuyamanga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach, and we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. That's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. These weekly Sunday discussions have included a full spectrum of topics from neuroscience and anthropology, art history, archaeology, mythology, archaeoastronomy, and much, much more. Please visit our website at kuyamangainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member, and we want to thank you, the community members, who continue to support the mission of the Kuyamanga Institute. Today, we're excited to continue the exploration of ritual traditions through the eyes of theater and performance. Our guest, Thomas Riccio, takes a unique approach to honoring the shamanic origins of theater, while at the same time embracing the power and evolution of what live performance has to offer today. The language of theater crosses all barriers. It reaches deep into our collective past. From generation to generation, Indigenous performance of stories, songs, dances, costumes, mass traditions were passed on and evolving over time. Thomas finds his way to the roots of myth, revealing the origins of cultural expression adapted for today. And he continues his work around the world, creating performances and conducting research in South America, Zambia, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Russia, Alaska, Korea, India, Nepal, the Mao of China.
Covers a lot of bases.
He sure does. And he brings us what he humbly refers to as his home movies. But let me tell you, his home movies are an opportunity for us to witness authentic rituals from the indigenous peoples across the planet that he was invited to film. They were very rare and extremely fun to have access to. So this is the fourth visit with Thomas in a continuing series. Previous titles we had was Shamanism, Ritual in Theater, Ritual Trance and Yin Yang Balance, the Dynamics of Ritual, a global perspective on the universal elements. And today, Indigenous theater, integration of arts, cultural, and ritual.
We're so glad that Thomas is a member of our advisory board. And it was some years ago that he left conventional theater to explore the roots of theater, working with indigenous cultures. And that research led him to spend a week with this institute's founder, anthropologist Felicitas Goodman. And he incorporates ritual postures into his work as he's invited by these various groups around the world to explore their myths, their roots, their emergent expressive dramas to create contemporary performance for the stage. So he's doing what ritual has always done through time, is renegotiate and renew itself to express the needs of today. He's also joining a growing roster of guests that we've had here who are documenting and helping preserve and celebrate these generational legacies and wisdom traditions. From ancient oral traditions of navigating by the stars across oceans, tracking game, reading the faintest of clues, now used to help protect animals, not hunt them. We value these vast knowledge and rich traditions of our ancestors that our Western way of life threatens. We may be experts at gathering up new knowledge, but we too often do so at the expense of this long-lived knowledge that's guided humanity from our earliest days. And that's just one reason why what Thomas has to share with us is important. His is a rare and a privileged view of something that we study deeply, ritual, its power, its purpose, its meaning, how it serves to maintain the connections between a culture and the cosmos. And these conversations that he's documented, the rituals that he's documented, yeah, it's a beautiful documentary, and we're so pleased to have you share it here with us today. Welcome back, Thomas.
Thanks for inviting me.
You know, I really want to mention this. You've written a lot, and we were reading several of your articles. And there's one in particular, to put this whole thing into context, there's one in particular that I want to share with you, a quote about why you left theater. You were a theater director in the conventional sense. And I really think that it's so important that we acknowledge to one another these calls to adventure, these deep stirrings in our soul that help us find our way, that we navigate by. And I think that I'd like to read this one from you because I think it really sets into motion a difference between our society, our culture, and these early cultures. And you had written, I entered into the bloodstream of American theater, only to find I was an industry worker selling a consumer product. I was having the same feelings I had as a teenager window clerk for McDonald's. In my heart, I knew theater had to be more than subscription series, grant hustles, good reviews, and cocktail parties with corporate sponsors. And I think that is so telling because that is the pressure on us today, right? To gather eyeballs, to gather support, to attract, to be alluring the bee, right? To attract the bees to the pollen. That is a real pressure that we all have today. But what if you were in a society in which your theater production, your shamanic rituals were the core of that culture, where everybody knew their value, where everybody attended, where everybody held it sacred? What a different premise to operate from. And so could you speak to that? And then what pulled you, your journey before we begin?
It started in Alaska by chance, and when I was hired as a assistant professor at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, and I was asked to take on an Alaska Native theater project because the previous person in that position had left unexpectedly to take a job elsewhere. And I thought I'd go up there for a year just to, because I was getting burned out and working. I was an artistic director of a theater in Chicago, and I'd worked in New York. I've done stuff off Broadway, off Broadway, and I thought that's what I wanted, and I was just very dissatisfied. And then I realized in going to Alaska that, and working with Alaska Native people, that it was a whole nother way of perceiving reality and the role and function of performance. So that was a big awakening, and maybe something that I kind of knew, but made me alert to it. I grew up in Cleveland in a working class area and working class family. And I went to a technical high school. And as a consequence, I've always seen knowledge as something practical and functional, and things that have real change. And what I found with Alaska Native and then subsequent work with other indigenous groups is that performance is centrally functional. It's practical. It's something that can move things spiritually, move things physically. It's a way of dialoguing and bridging dimensions of reality. And I had never seen that before because basically theater is very much a Western concept. It's about viewing and seeing, and it's very much human centric. Whereas an indigenous performance is more of, it's about interaction. It's about dialoguing with a larger reality. And so that excited me, and also was, kind of mind-boggling as far as an awareness that it gave me in terms of how my work can be functional, and how I could understand, if I could understand, let's say the templates or the deeper structures of performance with Alaska and then later groups, then to offer that to a larger community, which maybe didn't have access. So that's in a nutshell, very quickly.
You're a professor of performing arts and theater at the University of Texas at Dallas. What is your mission? What do you most want your students to learn, to embody?
Well, by happenstance, I worked, and as I mentioned before in previous webinars, that I've never really sought my work. The work's kind of sought me. and I get invitations from people I don't even know. Even Alaska was an invitation I didn't expect. And so my mission in Texas, and the reason I came to Texas was, one, I felt I did what I could do in Alaska. I had lived there 15 years. I worked with Alaska Native people, worked with this company, did a great deal of research that sprouted other work internationally. And I felt that now is the moment, a new phase of mainstreaming, or attempting to mainstream what I had learned internationally with my own culture, the Western culture. We were all once indigenous people, and I feel we are all becoming indigenous again. We're becoming earthlings, and a new culture is emerging, a new culture which we're seeing make economically, socially, culturally is emerging because of technology. But it's well in advance in a sense what we can comprehend and how we can manage it. And that's maybe part of the trauma where we are right now. Within the last 30 years, it's been like a shock to the system. The fact that we're wearing clothes from all parts of the world, and there are people tuning in today from other parts of the world and other locations. So we have another consciousness that's evolving, that's multiple locations, or not location based, no longer place based, but place is where we live. And kind of we're forgetting place, and the indigenous performance is a way to reassert and integrate and understand place. So we kind of need that balance. We're emerging, which is great, into a larger context, but at the same time, we are losing our place-basedness. We're becoming virtualized and digitized. And so my work in Dallas, and what attracted me here, was to somehow to experiment, research and development my work with indigenous groups into a Western context. Not to appropriate as much as to integrate and find parallels and similarities. Because one thing, having worked pan-culturally, I was able to, and still I'm still working pan-culturally, able to see similarities. Not that each is unique to place, and now how this new place that's emerging for all of us, how we can create something that's maybe more responsive. Because what we perform and how we perform really reveals who we are and how we perceive ourselves. And when we go to the performance, we go to a live theater show, we watch TV, Netflix, whatever, it's human centric. Mm-hmm. And if there are animals, if there's something that is the elements spiritual, it's usually thought of as secondary, or usually an adversary. A spirit's haunting you, or an animal is like out to get you, some Cujo or wolf or whatever, or a volcano is out to destroy you, or an earthquake. We see nature, and that's really indicative of how we look at the world. Mm-hmm. Whereas an indigenous worldview universally is not about that. It's about, okay, let's talk, we're dialoguing. And I see performance as a form, a venue of dialogue with the greater reality of that place. It's a way of dialoguing with place. And that's kind of my mission, and that's what it underlines what I teach at the university and how I teach at the university, and my own personal work as an artist, and continuing in my writings is essentially focused on that.
Do you write a lot about how the rituals that you've witnessed are in danger of disappearing, as so much of the indigenous culture and those wisdom traditions are. Do you feel that it was just a necessary fallout of the progress of our society and what we needed to do in the West, that we are threatening this way of life? Or could there have been a way where we could have done what we needed to do and retained ritual so that we would have a vehicle in place to work through this emergent needs? Because that's one of the roles of ritual.
Yeah,
to bring a society together and work through the psyche.
Yeah, we're finding it maybe more in a social, human-centric way. Mm-hmm. We still have rituals. I mean, they're maybe not as spiritual. We still have spiritual religious rituals, which are a way of touching a greater reality. But if you look at Christianity or Judaism or Islam, they're essentially trying to touch something to the benefit of humans. And animals in many cultures are thought of as secondary, dirty, or subservient to humans, rather than something that's dialogic or have a personhood. And so it's in a way I feel we have to evolve. and not necessarily ritual in terms of like the stereotype you know, you may see in depictions, and it's a way of like denigrating and marginalizing rituals, but a way of like a new way of finding it. For me, there's a ritual in everything, every day we do, everyday activities that we don't recognize, and that's an awareness. And to the point of documenting, in a way, it's kind of a parallel movement. I'm compelled in one way to apply what I know in a practical way for my own culture, but at the same time, when I'm working with other cultures, I recognize that things are fading very quickly because of this emergent global culture. And so I'm kind of a performance ethnographer at the same time, which gives me a deeper insight into the works and the workings of a ritual and a culture, at the same time to understand what could be drawn and learned from that, because they're mentoring me. So I kind of run these parallel lines in a sense. One feeds the other. So they're kind of distinct.
Is it a blessing then that we are so connected technologically around the world? Will a single shared culture emerge with all this cross connection and dialogue that will integrate all of these
it is.
threads
I mean,
into a
the world
tapestry?
culture is evolving.
This is a blessing. Our technology today is really serving to.
And everything is, you know, has a good and bad. I mean, it's great. It's great that, you know, at the same time, it's you know, you can look nostalgically and say it's kind of like a flattening of culture. So if I go to China and everyone's on their cell phone, the first time I was there in 2001 in the rural areas, nobody had cell phone. There weren't roads. There were mud roads, pathways, and no electricity. And then now everyone has a cell phone, electricity, cost of their lifestyle has elevated a great deal. So it's very different. And that's kind of a world culture, consumer culture, that's kind of like going and present in even the most remote areas of the world, including Africa. You know, remote places I'll go, they'll have, you know, technology or access to technology and styles, music, etc., that infiltrates. It's attractive, and it's, in a way, we're in a process of integration and kind of a movement. And we all know that what happens in one part of the country, whether it's an oil spill or something economic that occurs, will affect and radiate throughout the world. So we're recognizing this. We just have no, in a sense, no form to understand how to deal with it. That's like global, and no form to recognize and to communicate with the larger elements that are in our world. Again, throughout the world, most performance, the majority of it is human-centric. We don't deal with other entities. We don't consider them. Every ritual that I've attended, even if they're removed and more agricultural, nonetheless, there are spirits that are from the natural world and they have to be recognized and dialogued with, that they're part of the larger conversation. And so when you go to a museum and you'll see all the regalia of like animal skins or various flora on someone, then what they're doing is they're representing and they're dancing, because we're the humans are most responsible and the greatest beneficiaries of a place. We're responsible for representing the place.
That is such a wonderful distinction you're making. I'm so impressed. It's so obvious, but you've stated it so clearly. I just feel like that's something that we've kind of lost, that it's so human-centric all the time, and that all of a sudden the reason why we find these traditional methods of theater to be so compelling is because they still involve all those other elements. They're not just doing theater for the basis of a human story. It's a story of
To engage the cosmos.
Engage the cosmos around
In that larger perspective. I want to say that finding these underlying functions, finding the bedrock, whether it's changing on the surface and its expression immediately or through history or a future, but the bedrock is so important. The fundamentals. Right. And I think that's why your work is so important, because you're dissecting, you're unpacking what is the bedrock, what are these dynamics that are there in theater. Joel Primack and Nancy Abrams from last Sunday,
right,
calling for not only a new cosmology, a shared cosmology, evidence-based, historically integrated, but also a new identity, because from our cosmology, from our worldview comes our identity. And we need to revisit and update that. I think our work at the Kuyumungi Institute, Dr. Goodman's work of founding this as an access code to really directly experience the cosmos as a creative womb of life in the way that we do, is so important. So I'm just saying, let's bring it forward. Let's not lose these fundamental understandings.
The traditional power.
I don't think we ever will, because they're so deeply embedded in us, but it saves a lot of wear and tear if we just bring them forward with understanding and respect. What were you going to say?
Well, it seems like in traditional cultures, they understood the power of keeping these stories alive, and that's why theater existed, was keeping the stories of our connectedness to life around us. That keeps it vibrant and interesting, and it's kind of like a code of conduct. It's a code of respect, a code of
that all of life is sacred,
code of ethics,
and that we live in a web of life. It's not just us, not just humans.
There are two central concepts that really, I think, are part of my pan-cultural study. One is that there is there's a rhythm that and an embodiment of that rhythm that's portrayed in performance. And a rhythm, I know, is of course important for trance, but when I'm watching an entity dance, whether a spiritual entity or an animal dance in Burkina Faso, what I'm watching is I'm not only watching it, what I'm doing cognitively and bodily. The receptor of my body is taking in and encoding that, not only encoding the creature but the relationship. Just much like as if we interact, two people interact, it's like, we have a feel, we have a smell, we have an interaction of who they are in a generalized place-based feeling. So what happens is it becomes part of my body consciousness. And I carry it with me. So embodiment and that's conveyed by rhythm is very central to it. Another is form. So the form of how we convey. So when we watch a television program, we go to a play, et cetera, for the most part, there may be some alterations for style, et cetera. They're essentially linear progression, and they're kind of cause effect. So the causes are generally, they're not like spiritual, they're not animal, they're not mythic, or pulling on like a cultural story. They're basically physical or psychological or emotional. And we kind of watch it. So we kind of see the world very material cause effect way. And excluded from that are, again, these other entities which have no dialogue. They have no interaction with that or effect on that. It's always human based. And so we go, oh, they did it because they had a disruptive childhood. And we psychologize it, which is our default setting. And then we see this cause effect moving through time and space. And it becomes a way of how we see the world in a very linear way. Because that's in a sense how humans progress through. We were all, none of us here are probably from this land. Speaking for myself, that's my journey. My journey is portrayed in my linear progression of moving from one place to another. And so I had to create a performance form in order to emulate and basically reiterate, reaffirm that journey and the righteousness of that journey of the human-centric journey. So I'm not seeing it kind of interactive and emotively, associatively interactive, and rhythmically interactive. So those two issues, I think, are central.
And I'm hoping that one thing that's emergent for today in our global connectivity is that our home is not just where we are, where we live. Our home is the planet. Our family is the whole of all the species, the web of life, humans and everything else in our biosphere. That's my hope. That's our hope for our future. That if we're truly become cosmic centric, that we'll understand our home and our family as one, diversity in the unity. I think that's where we need to go.
It's happening. It's happening. We're in a really interesting period. I wouldn't want to live anywhere any other time except right now, because we are becoming more conscious of animals, becoming more conscious of the planet, becoming more conscious. I see in the chat about astrology and the greater cosmos and emotions, people's feelings about sexuality, about sexual preference. All these things are things that were once marginalized or not talked about are now kind of like something we are sensitized to. We're sensitive to others' feelings, which is a big transformation from how in my own lifetime until now, which is really, I think, remarkable and bodes well for the future. The thing is, how do we actualize it and how do we put it into practice? So if I see a performance that is both entertaining and also re-encoding me, that there's a larger reality, that in that human-centric reality, that is my ambition, my kind of
And
mission.
we are becoming empowered to really decide how we want to be re-encoded. We are writing our path collectively, are we not? The way that women are treated, the way that other races are treated, the way that we're treating animals, the way that we're treating the planet. It's a long road to write our path. But that is a very ancient view as well, that when things go wrong, we appeal to the greater sphere, and then we have to be responsible to write our path. Right? And ritual has always helped in that.
I think it comes back to
the Kuyamunga is a part of that. You guys are definitely an element part of that. Thank you.
I think
Thank you.
I think that all of us in this room, we have this thing that there's a the concept of global consciousness, that there is an awareness, a growth, an expansion of the human experience that can happen. It happens from the level of consciousness itself. That's sort of the foundation of this institute's premise, is that we have to not just intellectualize, we have to grow somehow, we have to expand, we have to be able to
Directly experience
that element, right?
And in doing so, flourishing happens. All those elements of gratitude and compassion and emotional resilience and a greater understanding and awe and wonder and beauty, bliss. Yeah.
Well, we can talk to you for hours without doing a slideshow, but let's continue the slides and continue.
I appreciate this. I appreciate putting it into the larger context.
Absolutely.
As to why this is truly important.
It really is.
And
That was a really profound discussion. Thank you, Thomas.
So, what are we going to do? What are you going to show us?
I like the term culture.
I was thinking, let's see here. I'll share my screen now.
Sure.
All right. This is kind of like, I got ambitious the first time and I kind of created like a 70 slide show, and we only got through maybe 30 or so. But what maybe a quick recap, and then I can go more specifically into my own performance work. And I should mention before we go on, it's Indigenous theater, that's fine, but theater we have to understand as a Western concept. It's about seeing. And that's kind of bundled in, which was important at that point. I think in our history, but we kind of got stuck on it. It's a way of viewing. And also we have to understand that theater as a concept is something, it's bifurcated. Essentially the illuminated mind, whether it's on your TV or in a theater, is speaking to the dormant body. And that mind-body split is kind of like indicative of and part of this Western conundrum. And what the work has to be for me and my work is to kind of like rectify that somehow, or somehow bridge that. What I'm going to do, maybe I just went through theater applications, all right, and then so basically I structure my work on rituals that I've recorded and witnessed throughout the world. And what I've done, and this is in Alaska, this is kind of where it started. And I'll just show a brief video and then explain why and how and where it came from and how I kind of bridged or jumped from a traditional Alaskan Native performance and ritual into application for theater. Okay. All right, so I'll just show a little bit of this. So this is a Duma Theater, Duma, which means pathway. It actually means pathway of a small animal that knows where it's going. And that was the name of the performance company that we had in Alaska. It's a university-based company that I basically inherited. And what I recognized was that the previous director let me just pause here. All right. The previous director of the group basically used Western means in order to explore Alaska Native performance and traditions. So essentially using it for like export and for a consumer product. And very much on the stage. So again, the audience, dormant body, examining the illuminated mind. Whereas when I had gone to several villages, I was given a grant because I told them, I said, I can't in good conscience do this project unless I do it correctly. I mean, I'm not going to like come in and mess up a culture that's already been traumatized historically. Because there was a late acculturation and late colonization in Alaska, and it's still fresh. And so what I want to do is the best I can. So they gave me money for a year to travel throughout the state. And so I talked to elders, et cetera. The first day of our rehearsal for the group, I started as I would as a Western theater person. I said, let's warm up. So we started doing like isolations in the head and all that stuff, isolating the body, right? Which is what you do, right? The body is my vehicle, my instrument. Then I realized I just said, stop. And I go, this is wrong. And they go, what they like, I go, no, you're not doing something wrong. This is wrong. Because what I was doing because I inherited it, it was just a part of my vocabulary. I was essentially isolating the body into modular parts, which is really a Western concept. Let's break it down, let's analyze it, and then put it back together, and then we'll do something, and then I'm going to feed into this larger system. So I go, let's create a ritual that's inherently based on Alaska Native performance. And so you see these movements here. They're students, so they're like 18, 19, 20, et cetera. But this is like a research and development, which we use to create a ritual. This is a warm-up, but not only warmed up the body, it warmed up the rhythm. In a sense, it was kind of like an opening to another way of like their own worldview. And so you see like caribous moving with the sticks. You also see masks which they made of animals that were specific to their location, and also the spirit stories, they had there. So I basically applied as much as possible, drawing from the tradition into a Western university format. And to create something. So even how you build, what the process is, how you build it determines what you come up with, and kind of retooling the mindset. And so this became kind of like central to what I did with other cultures. I look at the culture, draw from what's already inherent there, and then bring it forward and use it as a vocabulary. And then in a sense with the group, show the richness of who they are and what they have to offer. And then we create from that perspective. So in a way, we're jumping context. So that's kind of central to how I approached it.
That's very similar to our work. We try to bring it forward and then adapt it to today. I mean, that's growth.
It's the process. The process, in a way, it's all process. Even the performance is a process. There's no thing. It's like a finished thing. It's all process. The way I look at it, which has been fundamental in my reconsidering my own kind of aesthetic and how I approach things.
And form follows function. If you have the right form for your process, it informs your outcome, as you said.
Now I'm showing this. There was, when I was there, this is like I started there in '88, and I was there until 2003 in Alaska. There were only two of these kashims. They're called kashims or kasigis. And these are traditional houses. This is not my drawing. This is something for a text, anthropology text. But what I want to show here is that this is the performance.
Thomas, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you need to put the slides back.
Oh, okay. Hey, you know something? I'm glad you said that.
That's okay. Yeah, put it back up on screen, and we'll continue.
Okay, sorry.
And kind of back up a little bit so I can edit this out.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, so kasigi or kashim. So in traditional times, so this is from the Yupik people, and Southwest Alaska. What happens is a person enters here. This is like a snow entrance, a cold entrance, because again, it's like 40, 50 below in the winter. You enter here, you come down, all right, and there's a draft there. So you can come into the room here. This is how you'd enter. But you enter, so imagine you're wearing a parka. You're coming in, all right, and it's a fur parka, and you come up and you crawl up. You crawl in like an animal, all right? This is not headspace. You crawl and then come up. And so you're basically reiterating. Just how you enter reiterates how humans and animals used to be interchangeable and a relationship. So just how you enter the space dictates that. This is the fire pit where the shaman would work. And here's a smoke hole for that. And the audience would sit, and there'd be various levels here. But this became an important concept for me of like how the human animal interchange was very much part of the worldview. They believe that at one point in time before time, that humans and animals could interchange fluidly. And then the world became thick. And then by becoming thick, what happened is animals stayed animals and humans stayed humans. And now the elders told me that the world's becoming thin again, where animals and humans are interchanging. So, and that's kind of goes to the discussion we had earlier about I have a greater sensitivity to animal welfare and earth welfare and sustainability, which I hadn't had before as a cultural reflection. And so this is part of that. And then I'll just show, let's see here. Now this is, I'll just show a little bit. This is one of the first productions we did. So I used the kasigi, what you just saw in the previous diagram, as a model. And they're not great videos because this is like in 1990, I think. And the technology was not as good then. But I just show a little bit of how the kayak is, of course, the myth of the origins of the kayak, the boat. I'll just show a few minutes of this.
That's very traditional.
So I'll pause there. You can see, again, it's a university production, and many of the actors had never acted before, like in the theatrical or performative setting. They've performed in their community, but never like for an audience. One thing you didn't see was on each of the four sides, like in the kasigi, like in the ceremonial hall, there was audience. And the audience, there were no chairs. So we put down our padding. And so families could come and basically sit with their family in a very relaxed, casual way. And then what you didn't see in that part of the video was that on the wrist of one of the drummers, there was a string, and that string was attached to 3 concentric circles at the ceiling. And so every time the drum would beat, then the ceiling representing the universe, which was hung also with feathers and representing stars, also was rhythmic. So you're kind of seeing in this kind of the connection between mythology, origin story, the giving of birth, and also the giving of dances, which is all part of this mythic origin. And then also set in a communal setting. This here is, we had no script. This is our script. I mean, we had like a transcript of the performance afterwards, but there was no script in creating it. Again, the performance, the process was just as important as the performance. And so you see here, these are the creation, what we just saw here, of the two adults and the four children comes here, given by Raven, and then it moves in a circle, moving on through the entire dialogue of how a kayak, the founder of and the creator of the kayak, the boat, was born later, and then how he, with the help of animals, made the kayak. And so you kind of see it, and as he travels, he moves into this area where he encounters Western culture, all right? And then he moves through, and then how you can see here, television, snow machines, alcohol, and into the current environment, and then how, in a sense, his spirit still flies. So you're kind of seeing a progression throughout time and space, but based on how these are all ideograms created by an Alaska Native elder that assisted us in the production. And it was based on a well-known story of kayak. And so you see, we even use the methodology of how we recorded and how we presented things for the production, how we created it in the process of it. We interpolated into it. So everything was kind of coherent.
It's interesting how you say dancing made the child human. And so to get the rhythm of the universe flowing through one, to engage in the cultural identity and the story, to make one human. And so then Westerners come at a later date and deny that you can dance, deny you can use your rituals and your ritual tools, you know, just pulling the heart of the culture away and denying that. If you wanted to get at the root of a culture, that would be the vehicle, wouldn't it? A couple of interesting comments from the chat room. I just want to honor people who are posing it. Tony says, what is the direction of the entrance tunnel? And noting a remarkable similarity to Kazarikananda in Chaco Canyon, complete with this subterranean entry.
I don't know that culture, that tradition, but again, if they're crawling, it's probably animal related. By embodying and moving like an animal, and even dressing like animal-like, either with skins or like a parka in Alaska, and then emerging. So when they emerge within the Kasigi, what would happen is people would cheer. So they're cheering and they're adulating that human animal kind of interaction. And you see that. And then within the video, you can see a little bit of how animals and humans, they become indistinct. And then when they dance the dance, like the berry picking dance, that's a contemporary dance. They use it still. And so if I'm an Alaska Native person, I'm seeing now, I'm kind of seeing a performative interaction of where that dance came from. And I'm feeling connected in a way. History is told, but also it deepens my understanding, and that it was given by the spirits and by rhythm. And so it has meaning now. It's not just something that was someone randomly had and is kind of disassociated with life or a mythic tradition. It actually has a connectivity.
And it enters the realm of the sacred because it was gifted by the spirits. Tony, are you saying something?
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's my understanding that the people who would emerge would have feathered wings and helmets of a bird. So I think there's a little bit of what you're saying there, and maybe it's some kind of commonality. It is ancestral Pueblo. It goes back 800-900 years.
Yep. Yeah, I think you'll find a common denominator with place-based people, especially hunter-gatherers or those who are horticulturists and also hunt. You'll see kind of this animal connectivity that is very much a part of it. And I've seen that throughout the world. You kind of see this integration. And again, the rhythm is very much kind of like a connective tissue for it.
Yeah, there was also a foot drum in Casa Rinconada, which must have been remarkable.
Yep.
And you would feel that, right?
The
You're
vibration.
stamping and stamping, and it would go through the earth and vibrate you sitting in the seats circled. Yeah. I want to mention also David Hicks is saying his illustration resembles shamanic template descriptions found in Inside the Neolithic Mind, Consciousness, Cosmos, and the Realm of the Gods, David Lewis Williams. We love his work. Read that book. That is, yeah.
Shamanic temples, not templates, but yeah.
He said template descriptions.
Oh, he corrected himself. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, there's a template as well to the
Yeah,
temples.
that's true.
I mean, both words work. Anyway, your thoughts on that, and then.
I hesitate only unless I know more about the culture, but you'll find, I think, general associations throughout the world. Again, place-based hunter-gatherer or horticulturist hunter-gatherers will definitely have a lot of associations. And then they'll diminish as things become more modernized and removed from their place.
I appreciate Lewis Williams because he goes back to the Paleolithic, back to the Neolithic, looking at some of the earliest expressions of what we were doing and find how deeply embedded they are in us in a cognitive sense. These are impulses that arise.
Well, in the script diagram that I showed, in a way, we're not that different today. I mean, we're going back to iconography and Instagram, kind of like movements of stories, and we're becoming more visually sensitized and more visually aware of the depth of understanding, especially the fact that these Instagram memes are transported throughout the world. So they kind of gain and they shift meaning and they accrue new meaning as they move through the world. And one thing about the diagram, what would happen is in the performance, in the rehearsal especially, sometimes they would invert things or they would change things, meaning the actors would, because they rather than saying it was a mistake, I realized that basically intuitively it had to be something else, and they were kind of indicating, that it was something else, and so it changed, and it was allowed to change. Because nothing is stable, but it has a form that inherently kind of takes it,
is still
and
living,
integrates, and then is allowed also to change. So you have this form, but at the same time, you have a lot of freedom of interpretation, that occurs. So it grows. A ritual or a myth that is stable and freezes basically starts dying.
Yeah, yeah. It's
It
interesting.
amuses me that the hashtag today that we use is a very ancient symbol. Who knows what it meant then?
Oh, the
but
hashtag.
Probably
Yeah.
communication.
I was just going to say, and also the diagram kind of reflects a modern day mind map, or what we think of as a corporate way of following the steps. But also when you take into consideration what Lynn Kelly's book, The Memory Code, and she talks about that, that there's elements along the journey as we follow it outward that reminds us and keeps us within the story
On
that
track.
we're on track to follow. So it's almost like a reverse labyrinth. We're starting from the inside out. And
yeah.
so it's kind of an interesting thing. I was thinking
Very
about
cool.
at the same time as
And
I
it,
saw
and
the
it depicts the journey, right?
Right. And-
Individually, collectively.
Yeah.
And that diagram becomes really important for my own work when I work in Dallas and my own like presentations with my group. But let me, because I know I got too much. Let me see what I
It's
have.
fun. It's fun to unpack it.
And it's not your responsibility. We always interject and talk a lot too. So that's good.
So you're seeing that. I work with a Greenland Inuit company that was based in Denmark. They're now, they've changed their name, but now they're based in Greenland, in Nuuk. But so what I did is I showed you earlier the ritual warm-up. I continued this ritual warm-up idea with the Greenlanders. And the interesting thing with the Greenlanders was that many of them had lost their dance. And so I found myself basically not teaching, but assisting in the reimagining of their dance tradition. So I'll just show a little bit of this and as a technique, a variation. So I'll pause it there. I mean, again, I'm just showing variation, but because they lost their beat because of early colonization, then the Danes were in Greenland like 1640s, 1630s. And so, of course, they forbade dance on the West Coast because they could access the West Coast. East Coast, it survived somewhat. So the remnants of that. So some of my work was basically to teach Alaska Native movements. And the reason I put sticks in the Central Woman's hand was to have the beat in her body. And then later, I would use that and elaborate on that idea for other individuals to get the beat back in their body. Again, rhythm is this is not schwa. Maybe this is like a ritual. So rather than use that, I'll show. This is another metamorphosis theater, which was based in St. Petersburg, Russia. This is 1992, and you can see the use of the sticks. And this is also a warm-up that we developed. And these both warm-ups were, even with the Alaska Native people, were all evolved collaboratively. I just basically became a facilitator. But let me show a little bit of this to show a variation. This group was dedicated to the White Doves, which was a ritual group that had been underground for like 400 or 500 years. And with the emergence of new religious freedoms in St. Petersburg at the fall of the Soviet Union, they basically contacted me through a friend of a friend to develop a performance with them. So I'll just show you something here. Similar but different. I'll just zoom ahead here to the end. So it's like a 20-minute, this is just an excerpt. And again, it's a warm-up, but it's also a warm-up to the culture, to the rhythms, and also to relationships. And I'll show here the result. We did a performance, which really turned out quite well. And this is, you can see some of the remnants of things that were inspired by our ritual warm-up shown here in performance. And this was performed in St. Petersburg in, again, 1992, and later toured. It was on national television. I had no idea it would be such a success. This performance, I should say, was developed entirely by way of trance. Even the song was evolved and the singing was evolved by way of trance. This is a lobby of the Baltiski Dome Theater in St. Petersburg. They gave me the theater, and the lobby was much more interesting, so we used the lobby. And the Slav, pre-Christian Slavs are very much into fire dancing. And so that's what you see, the fire in the warm-up as well as in his performance. The two men on either end are birch spirits. And the birch forests are very big in and around St. Petersburg area. Okay.
Whoa.
I've had that experience in trance. You said this came from trance. I've had that experience in trance where
So that was totally created in trance.
yeah.
Just fantastically beautiful. I just meant a couple things. Fred was asking, how much of it was just from the state of trance? Was it spontaneous? Other than the clothing and the setup, was the entire thing orchestrated, or was it basic
From trance?
from trance
I
itself?
have to say
let
that
me-
is so indicative of what a trance can be. I have had that experience where the goddess comes up, stands behind you, and a veil of glowing light energy is enveloping you.
Right.
I've had that where another woman in the same group had the exact same experience. This is spontaneously. It is gift. It
Yeah.
is it's like the spirits come and gift you with the knowledge, the inspiration, the empowerment
well,
to come in and write your path,
represented,
do your
yeah.
job. I mean Tell us, Thomas,
How much was choreographed and how much was spontaneous?
Well, it's still emotional for me just to watch it.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Because so it was an hour performance, and it was really it was as I mentioned, it was very process oriented. But we tranced probably 7, 8, 10 times as a group. And what happened is we started trancing together, and we started sharing trances. And we included also the set designer and the costumer, the woman who did the props. They were part of it. And so what they would see would also be interpolated into the performance itself. And I would trance on occasion as well, with them. But I was essentially a moderator and documenter of the process. It was essentially, we formed it, we agreed on it, on how it should proceed. And we basically set it, but then within the setting of it, there was a room to move and improvisationally build on it. So it adjusted. I apologize. That's the only copy I have. It's not a great copy. There is a television copy, which I've been trying to get a hold of. A friend of mine in Russia has it. The woman essentially became, without our really intending it, she became the spirit of Russia, being reawakened after the dormancy of Tsarist Russia, and after the dormancy of and the brutality of the Soviet era. And it was like a rebirth. And so it was very much current to the feelings that move throughout the culture itself. But as I mentioned, the man who's a great singer, he everything one day out of trance, he just ran to the theater area. They have a propaganda theater, was formerly a propaganda theater with big images of Lenin and Marx, etc.
Yeah.
We had a piano there. He just stayed there for 4 hours, and this is what he heard. And he just banged it out on the piano and sang. We just left him alone. You know, I brought in a tape recorder. That's as much as I did. And then he came out, and that was it. And he sang throughout.
The power.
Well, individually and collectively, we hunger for those moments of transcendence, right? We just have a deep hunger, whether we're participating or we're witnessing. We hunger for those.
Yeah, and in the history of the Institute itself, not making it about us, but it's been something that, you know, Dr. Goodman recognized and brought forth a masked trance dance performance where we all come together and do the same steps that you're talking about, building on trances, 7 to 10 trances.
The visions
The
and
visions
enacting them.
and each person knowing what their role is and what spirit needs to be represented, what spirit animals, what spirit elements have to be represented in that trance.
That gives you the costumes and the choreography and the masks, and then you string it together.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that was really amazingly powerful
That was beautiful.
to witness.
And
I can
your
imagine.
audience totally understood what was being enacted, didn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, we speak that language.
I always want to side note. There's a respect for theater in Russia. I mean, there's a deep resonance and respect that even though in modern day news stories, everything is pretty negative right now. I mean, the people of Russia. The people of Russia.
Don't mistake the people for their government.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, it was definitely very, very moving, the whole experience. So, and it had an afterlife, like it ran for a year, traveled and throughout Russia. And as I mentioned, it was on national television. They brought a crew in and stuff. So it was very appropriate and for that
it took
moment.
you on that journey as well.
Yeah. I had to leave. The day I shot that I was arrested and spent many hours in what I found out later was a repurposed KGB jail because I was changing money on the black market, and then the money was made illegal as of that day, and so they made a sweep. And so I got to the theater maybe 10 minutes before, and my friends were so worried about me. So it was kind of a hectic day. And I had to leave the next day because I was scheduled to go back to work with the Greenland Inuit. So it was a kind of a hectic, time for me.
But look what you accomplished to guide that process into being.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Well, let me, if we still have some time, if you would like.
Yes,
Again,
we've got time.
I work with the Siberian National Theater, and you can see here. I think we get the idea. This is what the Siberian National Saha National Theater in Central Siberia, and likewise they were all trained essentially in Western style theater. They all went to Moscow, Vladivostok, studied Stanislavski, etc. And it's odd, and that's usually my position in a weird way. An outsider can say and do things that maybe an insider can't. And so I brought in shamans, I brought in traditional folk performers to train the actors, and we created a ritual warm-up based on their tradition, something they had never done, which is ironic, the fact that it's a Saha National Theater, but because of the politics, they were required to perform in Russian until just before I got there, and also, even though they all spoke Saha, and also to do Western style cause-effect linear progression theater, very much cosmocentric theater. And so I introduced and we worked on this ritual warm-up. I won't show this because you kind of get a sense of what the other warm-ups are. And again, some of this is on I think this one's definitely on my website. But let me show, this is something from the performance. We did it, they had this large stage. They didn't have an alternative space. But something that was very much influenced by their shamanic tradition. And in the previous webinar, I mentioned that it's the national religion of Saha is shamanism. And so I'll just show how we brought this idea into a story. Let me just see here. Okay. All right, that's just an excerpt. This is called Sardana. And the man who's drumming, his father was a shaman, and his father was persecuted by the Soviets. And so, and actually was not killed, but definitely arrested. And so he was hesitant, but he had learned from his father these various techniques. They believe that's a horse hide. They have a sacred horse called a milchmare, which is specific to that region in the world. And that's the horsehair, the milchmare horse hide is the drum. And so when you beat the drum, you're basically you're riding the drum or the horse through the sky. And so this image at this point, this is 1993, at the end of the Soviet era, and now they're allowed. So now the shamans are riding the sky again, and it's part of the storyline of Sardana. And Sardana is the national flower of Saha, but also she represents the spirit of Saha. So it's a lot of like spiritual revivalism and reaffirmation of what they had lost. And so we chose the story collectively after looking at several other stories. And this scene actually was part, I tranced also with this group, not as much, but we definitely tranced. And this scene was part of a trance scene that they had come up with. A lot of it, of course, is culturally encoded. It's part of like their cultural mythology. And so I could see why and how they came about this. But this was inspired. And as a consequence, it kind of gave it more traction and depth of meaning when we presented it on stage. And you could hear by the audience, they applauded and they clapped along with it. And it was very much an inspiration and reaffirmation of Saha tradition.
So again, a reclaiming of one's heritage and its reawakening is the basic storyline. So beautifully staged. with the shadow play and the way the fabric's draped and utilized.
The use
and
of light,
lights.
fabric, and
Yeah,
sound.
it really reminds me of the cave wall, using the shadow play and the cave wall, and you can just see this is spirit journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fairly typical. Let's see. I'll show maybe one from my group, the Dead White Zombies.
Oh yes.
And then explain maybe how one moves into another. So Dead White Zombies is a group I started in 2011. As I mentioned earlier, it was part of my initiative to kind of process what I had learned pan-culturally and bring those kind of ideas into my own work. So I used found spaces, site-specific, and I had a nice relationship with a real estate developer in town. So he gave me these spaces for nothing. And actually we created like, I think 8 different performances in those spaces. That area has since been gentrified. So this is something we did in 2012, and it's called Whole. It's part of a trilogy. The first part is called Flesh World, and it's about death. Whole is basically what happens after death, and spirits emerge into a space where they reconnoiter and they try to resolve their lives before they move to the next life. All right. And so the idea is that there is essentially the premise is that 2 spirits are dislocated at the fall of Troy, and throughout time they search for each other. And at times they are multiple personalities at once, meaning there are like several embodiments, both male and female, young and old, throughout. And then as they resolve through this journey, they resolve it into the third part of the trilogy, which is called Karaoke Motel, which is basically coming back into the world. So this is like the middle part of the trilogy. I'll play a little bit of this here. It's very different. It's very much trance-like. So that, it's very much, I trance with this group as well. And some of the ideas and locations, et cetera, were trance-inspired.
You promised to come to take me away.
I'll pause it here. I mean, there's more, but just give you a sense. The attempt was to essentially create a trance-like atmosphere. And what I did when I edited the show itself, the performance itself, I edited to kind of recreate that trance-like feel. Audiences essentially, they were not directed to go anywhere. Basically, they can go wherever they chose to, or where they would be inclined. And so there was no way for anyone to see the entire performance, because there are multiple simultaneous performances occurring throughout. So if I went with somebody, what would happen is they might split off to follow a character or be drawn to a certain event, and then I'd be going somewhere else. And then we may reconnoiter. And at times, you notice in the video, it's hard to determine who is a character and who's observing. And then what happens is audience members are observing others observing. And so it becomes kind of like this this holism, which is what I wanted to create, and a kind of a dissolving of boundaries of who is the audience and who's performing. We're all performing, and we're all moving to this space, and it's a willed space. I feel that they see what they need to see when they need to see it, and many people came back several times, and the performance was kind of durational, so it could last up to 3 hours. One time it lasted 5 hours, because what would happen is they would repeat, they would loop things or recombine. They had alternative scenes which they would combine. And so it was really kind of interesting and organic, but inspired by, as I mentioned, my work with Indigenous groups.
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me a bit of Santa Fe's Meow Wolf.
Yeah.
Where the boundaries between audience and performers, when they have a performance, are dissolved, and you're left to wander around a house where the trope is continuum disruption happened in the space-time continuum, and allowed the alien landscape to inhabit the space. So it's fun just to wander around and interact with that. And I think that's where a lot of exhibits are going, more interaction, which is really going back to the indigenous ways, less of the Western concept of theater and more of that early concept of the participants participate, right? The audience participates.
Yeah, look at performance in an indigenous setting is essentially a venue that's formed, but it's only to make a connection, but the connection is always there to a greater or lesser degree. So for instance, the Alaska Natives, the Inupiaq people of Point Hope, when they walk on certain pieces of land, they're basically walking the myth, and they're a reiteration of that mythology. So it doesn't it's not as intense and as focused as a performance, but nonetheless, it is a reiteration and the walking of the myth. And why do they
like
move
walking
there?
the song
And
lines?
And we're coming to that. I mean, we know that if something happens environmentally, it has broad-ranging effects in time and space, as well as immediate effects. We're now becoming much more conscious of that. So this is part of a similar type of a conscious awareness of place. And then how do we bring that? What we're lacking really is a performance form to kind of bring that and to really articulate that.
Would you say ecotourism is following on that sensibility, because we want to go to those places and observe nature in its most pristine state that we can still find, and then by just being there and grokking it and imbibing it and witnessing it, it's a transformative experience for us?
I think some are still kind of consumer based, getting in
It's the best we
numbers
can do for now.
but there are changes. I mean, and I've been advising various groups on how best to employ people at the same time retain the integrity of their culture. And how do you kind of like, by my working as in the tourist industry, how do I bring people into my culture and educate them to that, as well as re-educate myself and reiterate my own placeness within my own culture.
And,
So
and
these are
find
things that
where
are
the
happening.
two can come together authentically as much as possible.
Like an integration, because now it's kind of like we go and want a tourist experience, and where give me the Instagram moment, and give me the Hilton, so I have my warm shower and all that,
Yeah,
and I can
keep
have
me
my
safe. Don't let
souffle.
those lions attack. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
in speaking to Jan Val-Inkelstein, who looked at the Uchi tribe of Siberia, and when we spoke to her about the idea that we had been invited to present our work on a public stage, we were invited to present in Paris. I asked her, I said, what is the Uchis, what do they feel about the fact of taking ritual on stage? She said, oh, well, they were very proud of the fact that the Russian government had them traveling around this country. They always kept pieces of the secret parts of their elements to themselves, but they were able to share the ritual, to still have that inspirational aspect, to still have that integration between the audience and themselves. But also they still had something that was a piece of the puzzle that was still theirs to own, to hold on to.
And the same with art, right? You
Yeah.
can give a piece, but you leave one little piece, so it's not sacred art you're selling, but it's for tourists.
Yeah, yeah. And by coming back to just the name,
Although we did it very authentically
Right.
on the Paris
yeah,
Palais de Tokyo stage.
right.
Yeah.
Dead White Zombies it's
Such a commentary for
it's
who
a
we
commentary
are
of who we are. Yeah.
There's definitely a bit of the trickster in it. So I mean,
Yeah.
trickster moves the world. So
Yeah,
You
yeah.
also work with robots. You have a robot, Sophia, for whom you are the narrative director for a robotics company. What is your mission with that? How do you see your role there?
it's been a few years since I was creative director, but I've worked with the company since 2005. From the very beginning, that's why David, who was a former PhD student of mine, brought me on, was to basically integrate and somehow involve robots in an emergent mythology of us transforming our technology and a technological human world. And so that's been kind of like my take on it, and why he brought me in, and why I continue on a job basis to work with him. It's just all consuming, and I can't do everything. So I did that, for a while, and just like I had no time for life.
Well, it's interesting how integrated it is, because we create some of these robots in a human likeness, and we also become a little bit cyborg ourselves when we get knee replacements and hip replacements and this replacement and that.
And we live with our
right?
phones constantly.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Or we want to put on a VR suit and
Yeah, we're definitely
it's interesting.
becoming cyborg. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Such
So
a-
what
such a
carries
rich
over, and
commentary.
how do you perceive it? Do we just continue the human-centric, anthropocentric worldview, or do we somehow open it up and say this is an opportunity for something, a new way of examining the world and integrating this technology? Maybe have it all wrong. We're seeing it as an extension of enablement, human enablement, or maybe we should see the extension of like a world enablement. And that's my take on it.
Do you see the fact that first? I mean, you can go back to the Paleolithic caves and see the dawning of a shaman, of horned masks and bison robes and hoofs,
Yeah.
right? And the dance happening. And so this embodiment of the other, this embodiment of the greater web of life, the embodiment of this animal-human relationship that was once so precious, very different than we think of today. But these animals had superpowers we don't have. They knew secrets. They were following the rhythms of nature. They were there before us, right? So do you see that as kind of the same mission, to embody, to embrace, to inhabit, to commune more deeply, and that we're maybe doing that now with
Yeah, the world teaches. I mean, I have 2 dogs, and they teach me, and they remind me just by who they are, and they're just being connected. And so if I give them space to talk to me in dialogue, then they enlarge me, and as do the trees I plant in my yard, and the stones, the rocks in my rock garden. I mean, they're teachers.
the waters, the wind,
Yeah.
the hummingbird that will come and look at you in the face. Yeah. We want that relationship with nature. We want to retain that. We're in dialogue with the universe as it is. And maybe those animals, and certainly our pets, are one of the closest voices that we can exchange with.
Yeah.
Even animals, says David, experience trance states and perform some sort of theater. Absolutely. Look at birds' mating dances. Thomas's comment on dance and theater at the opening of his talk reminded me, in part, of one of my ecstatic posture experiences. I think that we can see so much in our culture, our mythology, our folklore, some of our art, the remnants of spirit journeys. I think that it is so deeply embedded in our culture in various ways that for us, once you had spirit journeys, you begin to see the remnants around us so often. Do you find that to be true as
Yeah,
well?
it awakens you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you
know.
become more sensitized.
The
Absolutely.
superheroes. That's one of our guests coming up. We have Douglas Wolk, who had read all of the Marvel comic books with his son as a project and wrote a book, All the Marvels.
Yeah.
I find the superheroes of today and the ancient heroes of old and spirit journeys so akin with superpowers. You enter into an alternate reality state in a trance, you've got superpowers. You can swim through water without breathing. You can fly through the air. You can see afar. You can dialogue with the animals, with the spirits, with the ancestors.
You can fly. You can
fly.
Yeah. All the
Yeah. And in our dreams, haven't we all flown in our
he's-
dreams? So
He's a nationally recognized author. It'll be really exciting to hear his story.
That's going to be
how we
fun.
can plug all that into it.
Well, what it all
as well.
means, how we're still reviving and exchanging and playing with all of that because we know it deep within ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? We have such a long history of the trance and the spirit journey
Well,
we still embody them in our culture.
And also coming back to the Russian gentleman who heard the music and then spent hours that evening.
Talk about finding your authentic song. Haunted.
That is such a powerful and inspiring aspect to it. And we've had those experiences where we just feel like even at the Institute, where after we finish a posture, we'll just say, let's just not talk. Everybody go grab some crayons and paint and whatever you can find, and let's just see what comes out, see what happens. In my case, of course, I love going to a piano afterwards and just seeing what happens and all of that. So everybody becomes a conductor. Everybody becomes a composer. Something's happening. Everybody becomes an artist when we're given that freedom to do so.
Oh, yeah. I also want to say that this reminds me also of, because I know that your actors had a script loosely, but they were enacting what moved them. And we, and many people that I've been meeting, this is such a wide movement, but the Heller family constellations work, I'm sure you're familiar with that. That was fascinating. We were in Ashland, Oregon. We were invited to be participants in this. And it was that here's a stage, here's a setting, here's a client, right? The person for whom this was done. And our instructions were simply stand on the stage, and I don't even know how they invoked a ritual or some kind of group mind state, but you moved around, you found a place on the stage that felt right to you, and you spoke through what came, what was emerged. And though I said something, I was the young daughter in this family drama. I didn't know even what role I was assigned, but it turned out. And what I said made her burst into tears because it was meaningful and it hit home with her. And that happened with everybody. There was just a few being the family members, right? And it was
Whether you're the
wild.
father, the mother, the daughter, whatever.
It was very different from here's a trance, you see your role, you see a piece of the choreography, you see a costume, you make it, it's scripted, you do it, and then you fall into trance again. This was in a completely different premise. So I think your work has there is something, my point is, there is something that we're plugging into so readily that we know, some state that we know how to enter automatically, even though we don't intellectually or societally know it, we know it some deep, deep way.
Yeah, I agree.
And that there's various ways of plugging into it through ritual, through the performances you do, through family constellations, through the work that we do, all these different methods. Why? Because there's something in the human physiology, perhaps in animals too, because they also lead with their herds, their swarms, their birds, whatever. They're entering into these states. Look at ants. How do they know what to do, right? But there's something that we can enter into in this group mind. And it has a dialogue. It has a choreography. It has a script that we don't need our intellect to follow, but we're using some other mental muscle, the psyche, the soul. And that must be such a joy for you to play with in your work. I just honor you as a theater director, performer, guide to tap into that in these various ways because it's so rich.
And
it is where the emergent happens, right? It is something we all hunger to tap into that is so deep. It connects Mother Earth to the cosmos. It connects all of humanity. It's the sound of the web of life. And we hunger for that.
I agree.
And when you taste it, it is an elixir that you cannot mistake, that you seek thereafter. It's such beauty.
That search keeps me inspired. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like a 40-year search with all these different elements. And, it's like a razor's edge, too. And especially nowadays with political correctness and things that are happening, it becomes more and more and more sensitive to be able to interact with traditional ceremony and ritual and all of that. And as a person not of color or not of that tribe or whatever, to be able to, but the fortunate and blessing that you've had is you've been invited. You're not someone looking, they're coming to you and saying, would you please come? That makes it such a unique story you just don't hear anymore. And so what a fabulous contribution. And coming back to the original story that you told about you arriving in Alaska, and then you started out with some traditional physical movements that are part of what theater does, and say, wait a minute, stop, don't do that. Don't let me project onto you and your culture something that I came with. It was just something that I would do.
Let me create a safe container for this to unfold and come to the surface.
Now let's see where you guys want to take us. This is
and the other thing is it's so readily accessible. That's what our culture does not understand.
Yeah.
We're built for this. We're hardwired
It's entertaining.
for this.
I mean, entertaining is not facile. It's actually entertaining the mind and body.
And when you engage that, then you are re-encoded. Yeah.
Well, and the other
You're
thing is
stitched back together to be fully human.
there needs to be the other thing about this thing is that we talked about earlier, that there's an encoding of storytelling that helps with the ethics and the direction of the tribe or whatever. But there's also today's world of Hollywood where storytelling sometimes becomes preachy and turns you off. The preachiness has to be encoded on a different level, not on a very surface level, because that doesn't have the effect you're trying to have. I don't want Hollywood preaching to me. I want to be entertained. So then there's the subtle element of learning through entertainment, but let entertainment be the guide. So
make it fun, make it fascinating. It's really interesting that I'm often asked, why did you leave a really successful radio career to do this, right? Why did you leave millions of listeners and now here are you speaking to dozens? It was because I felt that you can canvas all of human knowledge, but that's not enough. There's this force, this entity, call it the Jedi force, call it what you want. There is so much that the universe has to speak to us, share with us, transform us. I wanted that. I want to hear the dialogue of the spirits and the ancestors. I want to go sit with them. I want to spend some time with them. All of human knowledge is now flourishing, and we've created instrumentation, as we talked with Tony and Bob Woodruff and others, seeing afar, seeing farther into the universe, seeing down into the elements of what makes up the atom and stuff of life. We'll eventually get to dark matter and dark energy, won't we? But we can also have this avenue to speak this eternal now, this story that has been with humanity, that larger view that we can find by going within. That's the final frontier for me. Well, you can have both. You can have this and you can have this, from the innermost to the outermost. That's the breath that our age is allowing us to travel. What a journey. I agree with you. This is the best time to be alive. The most challenging and the best, the most opportunity, the most responsibility for each of us to show up, listen within, find our destiny, find our true path, and do our best to live it. As it's always been for humanity. It's always been the hero's journey. Right?
Well, there's
but we can,
And there's the yin and yang. There is the incredible amount of stuff going on that could take you into a field of depression. There's so much going on in the news and the
You
world.
can fall off the abyss
it's
easily.
really easy to get dragged into that. And then we have the storytellers that are taking us on the other side, saying how this thing can turn, how this thing can evolve, how these things can take a different direction.
And
so,
we're challenged to find your own story as well.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you.
Where were these
Thanks.
audience members that had questions?
Oh well, we answered them as we went along.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So we
But
need
there
to
was
give
one
you a
about
chance to-
Andre Serban.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I actually worked with Serban at the American Rep Theater. I didn't work on that production, but I knew him. Yeah, and it's part of a lineage, and also Antonin Artaud. I mean, we're all kind of build on what preceded us.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's just leave you some time for final thoughts because we've been kind of interjecting so much, but I want to just hear your voice alone
Well,
for
you
a moment.
stir up a lot.
Yeah, you've inspired us a lot. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He
Final-
stirs it up well.
Final thoughts.
No, I think I said it all. We're all here right now, and we just have to feel our instinct and follow it. I mean, you got to we have a short period of time on Earth, and to make a change and find what attributes we can, and the medium of how best to serve something greater than self. And that's, for me, is great fulfillment.
Yeah.
That's what drives me.
Yeah.
And
Well-
then find our avenues, right? So many avenues. That's the other thing I like about our society. We're not born with just one means. We're born with anything. We have the ability to find whatever it is that most speaks to us. But we must be on the journey.
Yeah.
And we must be seeking something larger than our small self.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm
final
having a great time.
and we're having a great time.
Yeah. Well, so this is the fourth segment, and I mentioned earlier that we've had Thomas on 3 other times. All of those videos are available. Go to QuyamangaInstitute.com and go to our video channel, because YouTube only allows you so many months worth, and then the older ones don't show up on. If you go directly to YouTube, you're not going to
That's
find.
heinous.
Unless if you put in
A specific
Riccio,
one.
Cuyamangue, the two words together, it would
okay.
probably show up.
But if you go to our webpage,
It's
you
all
can,
listed.
You can find
Yeah,
it.
we've
And
got-
Thomas is
Okay.
what your website
We got
as well.
70 or 80 videos there on our website.
Great.
And what's your website?
It's my name, thomasriccio.com.
Gotcha.
And most of the videos, not all, but most of them are there.
Yeah.
So,
It's better when you commentate through them and you set them up for us and explain what's happening. We like that.
All right.
So, thank you.
Fantastic.
Good luck on the documentary. Good luck on your work, your
thanks.
next productions. Thank you for being an advisor. Thank you for
yes.
all that you contribute to this institute.
yeah, thanks to you guys too, and
Yeah.
our audience there.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to ask everybody to unmute, and everybody can say thank you to Thomas for spending his Sunday with us and sharing his research, his world travels. Everybody say
Theater like you've never seen it before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
That
Thank you,
was
Tom.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Inspirational.
Fabulous,
Bye-bye.
fascinating, wonderful. Thank you.